She mocked human beauty. Then his words made the alien queen kneel. The Zareth Empire stretched across countless star systems, a realm of light and shadow, of shimmering cities and towers that pierced the skies. From orbit, the capital world looked like a jewel cradled in darkness, a perfect sphere of glittering structures that reflected the light of a distant sun. At the heart of this empire sat the palace of the alien queen, Zyra, ruler of millions, feared and admired across the galaxy. Her presence alone demanded attention. Her beauty was legendary, flawless and chilling, and her intelligence was as sharp as the blades carried by her guards. No one dared to challenge her openly. Yet she carried a secret. Beneath her perfection lay an emptiness that she herself barely understood. On the day Kale arrived, the palace seemed even more imposing than usual. The human stepped off the shuttle and paused, looking at the towering gates and spires, the polished surfaces that reflected the sky like mirrors. He was a simple man by the standards of the Zareth, dressed in plain fabrics that bore no insignia or wealth. His hair was unkempt, his hands calloused from work and travel. He carried nothing flashy or impressive, and his eyes held a calm focus, the kind that made others wonder if he knew something they did not. The guards, enormous in size and draped in ceremonial armor, watched him carefully. They had heard the rumors. A human had come to the heart of the empire, and all the court had waited to see if he would embarrass himself or prove to be another of the weak, primitive species the queen so often mocked. Kale's arrival was quiet, almost understated, but it caused a ripple of curiosity among the elite. No one had ever seen a human move so calmly among the Zareth throngs, unflustered by the grandeur or the tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Inside the palace, the halls were vast, stretching further than the eye could see, their ceilings adorned with floating crystals that emitted a soft, colored light. The walls were smooth and alive with subtle patterns that shifted as one walked past, creating an illusion of movement. Kale walked with measured steps, careful not to touch the walls or disturb the delicate balance of the decor. Every creature he passed looked at him with suspicion, whispers following him like shadows. The human, however, ignored them. His mission was clear. He came to negotiate, not to impress with looks or power. Finally, he was led to the throne room. It was even larger than he had imagined. The floor, polished to a mirror-like shine, reflected the light of the chandeliers suspended high above. The throne itself sat on a raised platform, crafted from a single crystal that seemed alive with energy. On it sat Zyra, the alien queen. She looked at Kale as if he were a curious insect, her eyes narrowing, her expression cold and unyielding. Her hair flowed like liquid silver over her shoulders, her skin glowing faintly in the light of the room. Every movement was calculated, every glance precise. She was the embodiment of perfection, and she knew it. "This is your ambassador?" she asked, her voice like ice brushing against steel. The words were sharp, meant to sting, and they did. Her advisors chuckled quietly behind her, sensing her delight in the subtle insult. Kale stood perfectly still, bowing his head slightly, showing respect without fear or hesitation. He did not flinch, nor did he try to defend himself. He simply waited for her next words. Zyra leaned forward slightly, scrutinizing him. "Humans," she said slowly, her tone dripping with condescension, "are said to possess beauty of mind and spirit. But looking at you, I fail to see it." Her lips curled in a smirk, and for the first time, Kale felt the full weight of her judgment. It was not anger he felt, but the unmistakable sensation of being examined, weighed, and found lacking. Most would crumble under such scrutiny, but Kale's mind remained steady. He met her gaze calmly, letting her see that he was not intimidated. The court murmured. This was unusual. The queen's words usually ended debates, crushed dissent, or humiliated those before her. Yet Kale remained composed, as though he expected the mockery and had prepared for it. He spoke then, quietly, his voice firm but respectful. "I have come to discuss matters of trade and alliance, Your Majesty. My appearance does not define my ability to serve my people or to speak for them." His words were simple, yet they carried weight. They were a subtle challenge, not in tone but in meaning. Do not underestimate the human before you. Zyra's smirk faltered ever so slightly. She had expected fear, fluster, or at least hesitation, but not calm reasoning. She inclined her head, a motion meant to show superiority, yet inside she felt the tiniest stir of curiosity. Few beings could withstand her gaze without flinching. Fewer still could speak without trembling. Kale had done both. "Very well," she said, her tone sharp again, masking the stir of interest that had begun to grow. "You may speak, but do not think that words alone will impress me. The Zareth Empire respects strength, wisdom, and cunning. Human words are often empty." She gestured to a nearby table where they would discuss terms. Kale followed, keeping his composure, noting everything. The subtle tension in the advisor's shoulders, the patterns in the room that seemed designed to intimidate, the quiet hierarchy of respect and fear that governed every movement. As they spoke, Kale noticed that Zyra's eyes, though critical, also betrayed a subtle longing, a desire to understand, to challenge, perhaps even to find something that truly surprised her. He chose his words carefully, focusing not on flattery, but on logic, fairness, and potential for mutual benefit. He spoke of shared resources, of trade routes that could strengthen both their worlds, and of potential cooperation in defense against common threats. Every sentence was measured, designed to present humans not as weak or inferior, but as capable and thoughtful. The Queen listened, occasionally interrupting with sharp questions meant to test him. "How would your species handle a crisis at the borders of your territory?" she asked, her tone skeptical. Kale replied with examples of human history, emphasizing adaptability and teamwork. "We do not rely on strength alone," he said. "We rely on reasoning, on understanding one another, and on finding solutions together. That is how we survive and how we thrive." Zyra's lips pressed into a thin line. She had never heard such confidence without arrogance, such strength without display. The court around them shifted uncomfortably. They had all expected the human to stumble, to show weakness, to remind them why they had always regarded humanity as inferior. But Kale was turning every expectation on its head, quietly, without boast or defiance. After hours of discussion, Kale's audience with the Queen ended. He was dismissed with a bow, leaving the throne room as quietly as he had entered. Outside, he did not celebrate or speak to the advisors. He walked through the halls, observing the empire, noting its beauty and its flaws, understanding it without judgment. Zyra remained on her throne, staring at the empty space where he had been. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty. The human had arrived, seemingly ordinary, yet something about his presence lingered in the room. It was not fear, nor charm, nor authority that left its mark. It was a quiet certainty, a strength of mind and spirit that demanded acknowledgement. Her advisors whispered among themselves. The human, he did not flinch. He spoke with wisdom, yet without arrogance. The Queen, did you see her expression? Zyra ignored them. She did not need their observations. Something had shifted inside her, though she could not yet define it. That night, in the quiet solitude of her chambers, Zyra reflected on the human's words. She replayed the meeting in her mind, analyzing every motion, every glance, every phrase. There was something about him, something that made her question what she had always believed about beauty, about strength, about the measure of a being. He had come as a simple ambassador, yet in hours, he had begun to unsettle the unshakable foundations of her certainty. Across the empire, Kale rested in his modest quarters. He was tired from travel, yet his mind remained alert, reviewing the conversations, the challenges he had faced, the subtle power dynamics at play. He understood that the queen's initial mockery was not just cruelty. It was a test, a reflection of her worldview, and a challenge he would need to navigate carefully. In the days that followed, the human and the queen would continue their interactions, each meeting a dance of words and ideas, testing, observing, and learning. Zyra's initial mockery of human appearance and supposed weakness would slowly give way to something more complex: curiosity, respect, and perhaps even an understanding that beauty alone did not define power. Kale, for his part, remained quiet, observing, listening, speaking only when necessary. His calm, unassuming demeanor masked a sharp mind and a resolute heart, one that had survived challenges on worlds far harsher than the palace of the Zareth. And though Zyra could not yet admit it, the human had already begun to plant seeds in her mind, seeds that might one day grow into a profound change in her view of humanity. As the sun set over the Zareth capital, its towers gleaming like molten silver, the first true meeting between two vastly different worlds had concluded. One would leave a lasting impression on the other, not through force, nor beauty, nor threat, but through something far rarer: quiet strength, thoughtful words, and an understanding that sometimes even the smallest presence can shift the balance of power. The Empire slept beneath the stars, unaware that a subtle but powerful change had begun. And in that quiet, Zyra felt the faintest flicker of something new, a question she could not yet answer. Could a human, so ordinary in appearance, possess a power greater than any she had ever known? The following morning, the Zareth palace hummed with activity as courtiers and guards prepared for the human's next meeting with the queen. Rumors had already spread throughout the court. The human had arrived and held his own against Zyra's sharp tongue. Some whispered in disbelief, while others sneered, convinced the alien queen would soon remind him of his place. Yet even among the doubters, a seed of curiosity had been planted. Kale was brought through the same shining halls as before. He walked calmly, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes quietly observing every detail. The palace was more than just beautiful, it was alive. The walls seemed to watch him, reacting subtly to his presence. He noted the patterns in the crystal floors, the way the floating lights shifted as he passed, and the discreet positioning of the guards. Every detail mattered. He understood that in this empire perception was power, and he needed to respect it without fear. Zyra awaited him in the throne room, her posture impeccable, her expression one of cool curiosity mixed with thinly veiled irritation. She had spent the previous night pondering the human's words and composure, and she could not deny the stir of interest that had grown within her. Yet she would never admit it to anyone. To the court, she remained the unshakable queen, flawless and untouchable. "Human," she said, her voice cutting through the silence of the hall, "you have survived the first tests of words and observation. Let us see if your mind is as clever as your patience suggests." Kale inclined his head slightly. "I will do my best, Your Majesty," he said, his tone steady, respectful, and calm. There was no arrogance in his voice, only quiet confidence. That confidence, however, carried more weight than any display of force. Zyra nodded and signaled to her advisors. "Prepare the first challenge." The court watched closely as a large puzzle was brought forth. It consisted of a complex array of interconnected shapes and symbols that shifted constantly. It was said that no outsider had ever solved it on the first attempt, and many of Zyra's advisors doubted a human could even understand the rules. Kale approached the puzzle. He did not rush. Instead, he observed carefully. He noticed the patterns in the shapes, the way certain symbols appeared more frequently, and the rhythm of the shifting panels. Most of the court assumed he was confused, but in truth, he was analyzing, understanding the logic behind the apparent chaos. After several minutes, he began moving pieces strategically. Each adjustment seemed simple, but it triggered a cascade of reactions that aligned more symbols than anyone expected. Gasps echoed through the throne room as sections of the puzzle locked into place. Zyra's eyes narrowed. The human was not only keeping pace, he was finding solutions where others saw only confusion. When the final piece clicked into place, a soft chime resonated throughout the hall. The puzzle had been solved. For a moment there was silence, then whispers of astonishment. The Queen's advisors exchanged uneasy glances. Zyra herself remained composed, though a flicker of surprise crossed her face. No outsider had ever completed this challenge without assistance, and Kale had done so with calm observation rather than brute strength or clever tricks. "Interesting," Zyra said finally, her voice even, though the words carried more weight than usual. "You possess patience, observation, and intelligence, yet this is only the first test. Do not presume your success here proves superiority," Kale bowed slightly. "I do not presume, your majesty. I seek only understanding." Zyra's lips twitched almost a smile. She admired his restraint. Many before him had responded with defiance or flattery, but Kale was different. He did not seek her approval, he sought truth and reason. That, more than any beauty or display of power, commanded attention. The next challenge was physical. Zyra raised her hand, and a holographic simulation of a treacherous terrain appeared before Kale. It depicted cliffs, shifting platforms, and sudden drops. Many of the court snickered, certain that the human would falter or hesitate. Kale, however, moved forward without pause. He did not attempt to leap or run like the alien competitors might. Instead, he analyzed each step, gauging distances and observing patterns. He balanced carefully, using momentum and timing rather than brute force. Each movement was calculated, precise, and efficient. The audience watched in stunned silence as Kale crossed the treacherous terrain with a mixture of focus and grace. He did not stumble, nor did he rush. Every step was deliberate, a testament to human adaptability. Zyra observed him silently, noting the subtle way he moved. He was not fast, not flashy, and certainly not extraordinary by alien standards, but he was clever. He used the tools available, his mind guiding his body. For the first time, Zyra considered that strength was not always measured by speed, power, or appearance. It could be measured by intelligence, by patience, and by the ability to adapt to circumstances. Finally, the human faced a diplomatic challenge. Zyra had arranged a negotiation with representatives of a rival species, one known for their cunning and hostility. The scenario was designed to embarrass him, forcing him to either concede or make mistakes. Many doubted he could even communicate effectively with the aliens, let alone achieve any result. Kale approached the negotiation calmly. He listened first, observing the other species' gestures, tones, and subtle cues. He noticed their priorities, their hidden assumptions, and their fears. When it was his turn to speak, he did so with clarity and fairness, appealing to reason rather than threats or displays of strength. He highlighted mutual benefits, proposed compromises, and offered solutions that addressed both sides' concerns. The rival species, initially skeptical, gradually relaxed. By the end of the negotiation, they agreed to a preliminary alliance, something no one in the court had expected. The human had achieved more through understanding and reasoning than most could with intimidation or force. Zyra's advisors whispered among themselves. How did he manage that?" one asked. "He is human, yet he commands respect without power or beauty." Others nodded, reluctantly impressed. Even those who had doubted him could not ignore his effectiveness. Zyra herself remained silent, her expression unreadable. Internally, however, she felt a shift. The queen who had mocked human beauty now recognized something unexpected. Humans, though not physically imposing or dazzling in appearance, possessed resilience, intelligence, and subtle strength. Kale's calm confidence, patience, and reasoning challenged her long-held beliefs. After the challenges, Kale was dismissed once more. He left the throne room quietly as he had before, but the impact of his presence lingered. Whispers followed him through the halls. Courtiers debated, some in awe, some in anger, and some in fear. Even Zyra's closest advisors began to question their assumptions about humans and their abilities. That night, in her private chambers, Zyra reflected on the day's events. She replayed each moment, each response, each subtle gesture of the human. She could not deny it. Kale had impressed her, challenged her, and unsettled her. She had expected to mock and belittle, yet instead she had been forced to reconsider her assumptions. For the first time in years, Zyra felt uncertainty, a strange, almost exhilarating sensation. She had spent centuries mastering her appearance, her mind, and her influence. She had believed that beauty and perfection were the ultimate measures of worth. And yet, the human had demonstrated that true power could exist beyond the superficial. Meanwhile, Kale rested in his quarters, reviewing the day's events. He understood the delicate balance of power within the Zareth Empire and recognized that his success so far was only the beginning. The Queen's attention was both an opportunity and a challenge. He knew that to achieve his mission, he would need to continue demonstrating humanity's strengths, intelligence, adaptability, and integrity. He did not need to impress with appearance or force. His actions and his mind would speak for themselves. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Kale faced smaller tests, each designed to challenge his logic, patience, and diplomacy. Each time he succeeded not by being the strongest, fastest, or most beautiful, but by thinking carefully, observing deeply, and acting wisely. Slowly, the whispers in the court shifted from mockery to respect. Even the most skeptical advisors began to recognize that humans, though different, were formidable in their own way. Zyra watched all of this closely. She did not admit it to anyone, not even herself, but a quiet admiration grew within her. She began to consider that her own understanding of power, beauty, and strength might be incomplete. Perhaps humans were not inferior. Perhaps they were different, and that difference was something worth observing and even learning from. One evening, as Kale prepared to leave after another audience, Zyra called him back. She regarded him quietly, her silver eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and something more vulnerable. "Human," she said softly, almost hesitantly, "you have done more than survive my tests. You have intrigued me. This is unexpected." Kale bowed, as always respectful but calm. "I am honored, Your Majesty," he replied simply. "I seek only to serve the mission I was sent to complete and to foster understanding between our peoples." Zyra studied him for a long moment. She realized that she could not dismiss him as she had initially intended. This human, ordinary in appearance but extraordinary in mind and spirit, had begun to change the way she viewed not only him, but her empire and herself. As Kale departed, the Queen felt an unfamiliar sensation, the stirrings of humility, curiosity, and respect. The human had arrived as an outsider, yet he had already begun to leave a lasting impression on the heart of the Zareth Empire. For the first time, Zyra wondered what might happen if she truly listened, if she truly observed, and if she allowed herself to learn from the human before her. The palace, magnificent and imposing, seemed quieter that night. The stars above reflected the glow of the city below, and a subtle change had begun, a change that neither Kale nor Zyra could yet fully understand. The mockery of human appearance had ended, replaced by a recognition of something far deeper, the quiet, unyielding power of mind and spirit. In the days to come, the tests would continue, but the foundation had already shifted. Kale's calm presence, patience, and intelligence had begun to challenge centuries of belief. The Queen, once untouchable and unshakable, now faced a new truth. Humans were not weak. They were not inferior. And one human, in particular, was capable of reshaping her understanding of strength, wisdom, and respect. The following week in the Zareth Palace was unlike any other. The air hummed with quiet tension, and courtiers whispered in corners about the human who had arrived, and somehow earned a place in the queen's attention. Kale's calm demeanor and steady reasoning had shifted the balance of curiosity and respect within the court. Though many still doubted the abilities of his species, even they could not ignore the subtle influence he had begun to exert. Zyra, the alien queen, found herself thinking about him more than she cared to admit. His ordinary appearance, which she had initially mocked, now seemed irrelevant. What mattered was the quiet confidence in his posture, the clarity in his words, and the intelligence in his actions. She did not like that she found herself studying him, analyzing his behavior, trying to anticipate his thoughts. She was the ruler of the largest empire in known space. Yet Kale, a mere human, had introduced a complication to her understanding of strength, beauty, and influence that unsettled her more than any military threat ever could. The day's session began in the council hall, a vast chamber filled with glowing panels, floating lights, and intricate carvings that told the history of the Zareth Empire. Advisors, generals, and diplomats crowded the room, all waiting to observe the interaction between their queen and the human. Zyra's gaze rested on Kale as he entered, noting the way he walked calmly, his eyes scanning the hall, absorbing every detail. There was no fear, no pretense, just focus. Even the courtiers found themselves studying him, a mixture of suspicion and admiration crossing their features. "Human," Zyra began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber, "you have impressed me with your previous successes. But the true measure of a species lies not in individual accomplishments, but in its ability to endure challenges, adapt, and think beyond the obvious. Today, we will see if your reasoning is as deep as you have shown." She waved a hand, and a holographic display shimmered to life in the center of the chamber. A complex scenario unfolded, depicting a planetary system on the brink of collapse. One of its moons was unstable, threatening to crash into the inhabited planet below. Kale would have to propose a strategy to save the population while balancing political alliances, scarce resources, and competing species interests. The room fell silent as Kale approached the simulation. Unlike the alien diplomats who were trained to rely on brute force or advanced technology, Kale scanned the scenario carefully. He considered the environment, the logistics, and the human lives at stake. He saw that the aliens' instinct would be to dominate and control, to impose their will without considering the broader consequences. Kale, however, thought differently. He looked for solutions that balanced the needs of multiple parties, using negotiation, reasoning, and foresight. Minutes passed as he worked through the problem. The court murmured among themselves. Some doubted that he could find a solution, predicting failure, while others began to lean forward, intrigued by his methodical approach. Kale finally spoke, his voice calm but commanding. He outlined a multi-step plan that included evacuating civilians, reinforcing the moon's orbit with controlled energy bursts, and negotiating with the alien species to ensure cooperation. Each step was logical, practical, and executed without arrogance. Zyra watched him closely, her silver eyes reflecting both admiration and disbelief. "You consider multiple perspectives," she said, almost quietly. "Most beings focus on their own interests first, yet your strategy accounts for cooperation, survival, and fairness." "Interesting, very interesting." Kale did not respond with flattery. He simply said, "Understanding others and predicting consequences is how humans survive, Your Majesty. It is not perfect, but it is effective." The queen leaned back in her throne, her expression carefully neutral, though inside, a storm of conflicting emotions churned. She had always believed that beauty, intellect, and power were measures of superiority. Yet Kale, unassuming and ordinary in appearance, had demonstrated a capability she could not dismiss. His mind, his reasoning, and his foresight were qualities that even the most brilliant Zareth scholars could envy. Later, Zyra brought Kale to the mirror chamber, a place reserved for the most trusted or influential visitors. The chamber contained a crystal mirror, polished to perfection, capable of reflecting not just the outer appearance but the inner qualities of anyone who gazed upon it. The mirror was said to reveal the true nature of a being, their desires, fears, and strengths. Many aliens avoided it, fearing the truths it might reveal. "Human," Zyra said, her tone softer than usual, "look into this mirror. It reveals the essence of who you are. Few can face it without fear." Kale approached without hesitation. As he gazed into the mirror, he saw himself reflected not as the ordinary man who had entered the palace, but as someone resilient, resourceful, and thoughtful. He saw the choices he had made, the principles he lived by, and the compassion that guided him. It was not arrogance or superiority that defined him, but integrity and determination. Zyra observed him silently. When she looked into the mirror over his shoulder, she expected to see flaws, weaknesses, or signs of deceit. Instead, she saw clarity, courage, and a human determination that dwarfed her own calculated perfection. Her breath caught, though she quickly masked it. No one had ever impressed her in such a way, let alone unsettled her. "You are different," she said finally, her voice quieter than intended. "Most beings hide behind beauty, power, or fear, yet you stand openly, guided only by your mind and principles." Kale inclined his head, his tone calm. "I do not seek to hide, Your Majesty. I only seek to act wisely, even when the challenges seem insurmountable." The room was silent. Zyra found herself kneeling instinctively, though not in submission to Kale, but in acknowledgement of something she could not yet explain. It was humility, respect, and understanding all at once. The court gasped, unable to comprehend the queen's unusual behavior. She quickly straightened, masking her gesture, yet the moment had already passed into memory. The following days were filled with smaller, subtler challenges. Kale faced debates with diplomats, problem-solving exercises, and simulations that tested decision-making under pressure. Each time he succeeded not by strength or beauty, but by reasoning, patience, and insight. The courtiers began to see that humans, though physically ordinary, possessed a kind of power that was rare and often underestimated. Zyra, meanwhile, found herself reflecting on her own beliefs. She had always judged other species by their outward appearance, by their displays of strength, and by the elegance of their form. Kale's actions, however, challenged every assumption she had held. She began to consider that beauty alone was not a measure of superiority. True power lay in thought, in action, and in the ability to face challenges with integrity and courage. One afternoon, as Kale prepared to leave after another audience, Zyra called him back. She stood before him, her posture still regal, yet her eyes betrayed a subtle curiosity. "Human," she said, "you have survived every test I have set before you, and yet you do not seek to impress or dominate. Why?" Kale considered the question carefully. "Because impressing with power or beauty is fleeting. What lasts is understanding, wisdom, and trust. That is what humans value, Your Majesty. That is what I believe all intelligent beings should value." Zyra studied him for a long moment. She had never encountered a being who spoke with such honesty, confidence, and humility simultaneously. The realization struck her. She had underestimated humans, assuming they relied on appearances or physical prowess. In truth, they possessed qualities that her empire had overlooked: resilience, insight, and the ability to inspire respect without force. Over the next several weeks, the human and the queen developed a cautious, unspoken rapport. Kale did not seek friendship or influence. He simply acted with consistency, reason, and integrity. Zyra, in turn, began to respect his perspective, often seeking his counsel on complex matters. She found herself questioning her own decisions, reconsidering policies, and evaluating the assumptions she had held for centuries. The courtiers noticed the change. The queen's demeanor shifted subtly in Kale's presence. She listened more attentively, asked more thoughtful questions, and allowed his reasoning to influence her decisions. Whispers spread throughout the palace. The human had affected the queen in ways no alien had ever managed. Some were alarmed, fearing a shift in power, while others were intrigued, recognizing the value of his insight. One evening, Zyra summoned Kale to her private gardens, a serene space of bioluminescent plants and softly flowing water. The atmosphere was calm, the perfect setting for reflection. "You have changed something within this empire," she said quietly, "and perhaps something within me as well." Kale nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "I only act according to my principles, Your Majesty." Change is a natural result of reflection, observation, and understanding. It is not forced, it is earned. Zyra remained silent for a moment, watching the gentle glow of the garden. For the first time, she allowed herself to see beyond appearances, beyond perfection, and beyond fear. She considered the human not as an outsider or an inferior being, but as someone whose perspective could teach even the ruler of the greatest empire a lesson about strength, wisdom, and respect. By the end of Part 3, it was clear that the Queen had begun to question everything she believed about humans and power. Kale's calm presence, intelligence, and integrity had unsettled her assumptions and opened her mind to new possibilities. The stage was set for even greater revelations, challenges, and understanding in the days to come. The human had arrived as an outsider, yet he had begun to reshape the perceptions of an empire and the heart of its ruler, not through beauty, not through force, but through the quiet strength of mind and spirit. The Zareth Empire was alive with whispers. The corridors of the palace, which once echoed only with the quiet hum of authority, now carried conversations filled with speculation about the human who had entered their world and changed the court's energy. Kale's presence had begun to unsettle the expectations of the Queen's advisors. They had assumed that humans were weak, fragile, and easily dismissed, but Kale had disproven every assumption with calm intelligence, measured actions, and quiet insight. The court was learning, slowly, that strength came in many forms, forms they had never recognized before. Zyra, the queen, found herself restless. She paced the halls of her private chambers, her silver eyes reflecting the shifting light of the floating crystals. Her mind replayed every interaction with Kale, the calm way he faced the challenges, the logic in his decisions, and the unwavering integrity he displayed, even when confronted with her subtle tests of wit and judgment. For centuries, she had ruled with a combination of fear, beauty, and intellect. No being had ever made her question herself. Yet Kale, with nothing but his presence and thought, had begun to do just that. The next day, the Queen summoned him to a meeting that would test more than his intellect. This time, the challenge was subtle, designed to reveal character rather than skill. A minor dispute had erupted between two alien factions within the Empire, both claiming rights to a newly discovered mineral-rich planet. The Council had prepared a series of reports, all favoring the factions' own positions. Zyra's goal was clear. She wanted to see if Kale would act impulsively, choosing one side to impress her, or if he could navigate the delicate politics with fairness and understanding. Kale entered the council chamber and observed the tension immediately. Representatives of the two factions argued with vehemence, their gestures sharp, their voices rising. Most advisors were prepared to intervene, ready to impose a solution that would benefit the empire's image rather than the people involved. Kale, however, remained calm. He listened, noting the concerns of each side, identifying the fears and motivations behind their words. Unlike the aliens, he did not assume deception or malice. He sought understanding. When he spoke, the room fell silent. "We must first consider the lives of those affected by this conflict," Kale said quietly but firmly. "The planet is rich, yes, but wealth is meaningless if it costs lives or trust. We must find a solution that balances resources, safety, and cooperation. His words were simple, yet they carried authority. The court murmured in surprise. This human, ordinary in appearance and stature, had suddenly commanded attention in a way few aliens could manage. Kale proposed a plan that allocated the planet's resources fairly, establishing joint oversight councils to prevent unilateral exploitation. He suggested that both factions contribute to infrastructure, share technology, and agree to transparent reporting. By doing so, Kale created a solution that promoted collaboration rather than dominance. The factions, initially skeptical, found themselves agreeing, impressed by the reason and fairness behind his approach. Zyra watched in silence, her expression unreadable though inside, she felt a mix of pride and discomfort. The human had succeeded again, not by intimidating, not by outshining, but by seeing the truth in a complex situation and acting with wisdom. He had earned not just respect from the factions, but subtle admiration from the queen herself. Word of Kale's success spread quickly throughout the palace and beyond. Courtiers, diplomats, and even rival species began to recognize the potential power of humanity. They were ordinary in appearance, yes, but capable of strategic thinking, negotiation, and empathy, qualities that were sometimes more valuable than beauty or brute strength. Zyra, however, found herself facing a new challenge. The queen within her, accustomed to controlling perceptions and commanding respect through fear and perfection, was beginning to feel something entirely new. Curiosity, humility, and even admiration had begun to replace her habitual sense of superiority. She realized that her previous judgments had been shallow, her assumptions about humans incomplete. Kale had not only survived her challenges, but he had made her question herself, her empire, and the measures by which she had judged others for centuries. One afternoon, Zyra called Kale to the gardens again, a space of glowing flora and flowing water where the air was fragrant and serene. She walked beside him, her voice soft but deliberate. "Human, you have changed something within this empire," she said. "You have shown that intelligence, patience, and understanding can accomplish what power and beauty alone cannot. Do you understand what this means?" Kale nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty. It means that respect is earned, not demanded. That the measure of a species is not what is seen, but what is done." His words, simple as they were, carried weight. They echoed in the garden, lingering in the space between them. The queen paused, considering his statement. She realized that for the first time, she had not dictated the terms of influence. Kale had done so quietly, subtly, without force. He had introduced a new kind of power into her world, one that relied on reason, integrity, and clarity of thought rather than spectacle or dominance. Over the next few days, Kale continued to meet with Zyra and her council. He advised on economic policies, trade agreements, and diplomatic strategies. In each case, his input was grounded not in ambition or self-interest, but in logic and fairness. Slowly, the court began to recognize the human as a source of guidance, even though he was still technically an outsider. The advisors who had mocked him earlier began to follow his reasoning, realizing that his perspectives were sound and often more effective than the traditional approaches they had relied upon for centuries. Zyra observed all of this closely. She noticed how the courtiers shifted in her presence, how they began to anticipate Kale's reasoning, and how her own decisions started to incorporate his insights. She began to see that humans, despite their simplicity in appearance, possessed qualities that could reshape an empire. They had the power to influence not through fear or beauty, but through consistency, intelligence, and ethical action. One evening, as she walked alone in the palace corridors, Zyra reflected on the changes unfolding before her eyes. She realized that she had underestimated humans not because they lacked ability, but because her own perspective had been limited by centuries of tradition and assumptions. Kale had forced her to rethink everything she had believed about strength, beauty, and influence. He had reminded her that true power was not just in appearance or force, but in integrity, insight, and action. Kale, meanwhile, remained unaware of the full impact of his presence. He acted as he always did, observing, thinking, and speaking only when necessary. He understood the delicate dynamics of the palace and the empire, and he knew that his role was not to dominate or impress, but to demonstrate the value of humanity through his actions. Each step he took, each decision he made, reinforced a new narrative. Humans could be trusted, humans could think critically, and humans could achieve greatness through thought and character rather than spectacle. The Queen's advisors noticed the change in her behavior. They whispered cautiously among themselves, wondering if Zyra was beginning to see humans differently. Some were alarmed, fearing that their influence might diminish, while others were intrigued by the potential for growth and collaboration. Kale's impact was subtle, yet undeniable. One particular incident highlighted his growing influence. A dispute had arisen with a neighboring empire over trade rights in a resource-rich sector. The Tsareth had initially planned to assert dominance, using their military and wealth to enforce compliance. Kale, however, proposed an alternative approach: negotiation and mutual benefit. He outlined a plan where both sides would gain from collaboration, reducing tension while increasing economic prosperity. The Queen hesitated, then approved his plan. To the astonishment of the court, it succeeded. The rival empire agreed to the terms, impressed by the fairness and foresight of the proposal. Zyra watched as the result unfolded. She realized that Kale's influence was not based on fear, coercion, or beauty. It was based on reason, empathy, and vision. He had taught her a lesson that few beings in her empire had ever managed. That power could be wielded without dominance, and respect could be earned without force. As Part 4 drew to a close, the stage was set for an even greater revelation. Kale's calm intelligence and unwavering integrity had begun to shift the perception of humans within the Tsareth Empire. The Queen herself had begun to question her own beliefs, opening her mind to new possibilities. What had started as a simple meeting between a human diplomat and an alien ruler had grown into a profound transformation, not just in policy, but in perspective, understanding, and respect. Zyra realized, perhaps for the first time, that strength was not only measured by beauty, force, or fear. True strength came from clarity, courage, wisdom, and the ability to act with integrity. Kale, ordinary in appearance but extraordinary in mind and spirit, had introduced that truth into the heart of her empire. The empire, silent under the starlight outside, seemed to hold its breath. A subtle change had begun, one that would continue to ripple through the court, the Queen, and the people of the Tsareth. Kale, by simply being himself, had begun to prove the ultimate human truth, that greatness does not lie in appearance or status, but in heart, mind, and action. The Tsareth palace was quieter than usual that morning. Even the ever-watchful guards moved with unusual restraint, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Kale had become more than a guest or observer. He had become a force of subtle change, one that challenged centuries of tradition and perception. The Queen's own thoughts seemed less certain, her pride tempered by a growing awareness that humans were unlike any species she had ever encountered. Zyra watched him from her balcony, where she could see him walking calmly through the marble corridors. He moved with deliberate thought, observing everything around him without haste, without arrogance. The courtiers noticed her attention, whispering among themselves. They could see that something unusual was occurring. The Queen, untouchable and majestic for countless years, was quietly reevaluating her own beliefs. The day's audience was called in the main throne room. It was designed to be formal and imposing, meant to remind all visitors of the Queen's authority. Kale entered with his usual composure, bowing lightly to Zyra. He carried no weapons, no ornaments, no display of status, only his presence, his calm demeanor, and his intellect. Zyra rose from her throne, her silver eyes fixed on him. "Human," she said, her voice steady but carrying weight, "you have proven yourself repeatedly through thought, strategy, and reason. You have survived tests meant to challenge mind and spirit. Now I wish to see how you face a final trial, not of intellect but of truth and influence." Kale inclined his head. "I will do my best, Your Majesty." The trial was unlike any before. Zyra had gathered representatives from across her empire, including advisors, diplomats, military leaders, and even members of the rival species who had interacted with Kale. In front of them, she posed a challenge not of logic or diplomacy, but of values and vision. She asked Kale to present a perspective on the future of the Zareth Empire, one that considered justice, prosperity, and the well-being of all its people. The court gasped silently. Many expected a human to falter here, to be overwhelmed by the complexity of governing a galaxy-spanning empire. But Kale remained calm. He walked to the center of the hall, his gaze sweeping across the assembled assembly. "The strength of an empire," he began, his voice clear and even, "is not measured by wealth, weapons, or beauty. It is measured by the choices it makes for the good of its people, the fairness of its governance, and the wisdom of its leaders. Authority alone cannot sustain loyalty. Only justice, understanding, and respect can create lasting strength." Whispers echoed through the chamber. Kale continued, citing examples from previous interactions, where cooperation had achieved more than dominance, where reason had avoided conflict that brute force could not have prevented. He spoke of humans and their values: resilience, empathy, innovation, and courage. He emphasized that no species, however beautiful or powerful, could endure if it relied solely on appearances or fear. Zyra listened in silence, her expression composed, though her heart raced. She realized that every word Kale spoke resonated with the truth she had glimpsed but had long ignored. The human's reasoning was simple yet profound. It revealed flaws in her long-held beliefs and illuminated a path forward that combined wisdom, fairness, and strength of mind. As Kale concluded, he paused and looked directly at Zyra. "Your Majesty, true leadership is not about being admired or feared. It is about guiding your people wisely, respecting their worth, and embracing the strengths of all who serve with integrity. Only then can an empire endure." The hall fell silent. For a moment, even the most skeptical advisors could not speak. The clarity and honesty of Kale's words struck deep. They were simple, not ornate, but they carried authority. It was not Kale's position or status that commanded attention. It was his understanding, his integrity, and the truth in his perspective. Zyra rose from her throne fully, stepping closer to the human who had so quietly, so subtly, transformed her perception. "Human," she said, her voice unwavering yet touched with awe, "you have shown me the power of truth, insight, and integrity. You have challenged centuries of belief and forced me to see beyond appearances. You have reminded me that wisdom can come from unexpected places, and strength can exist in forms we fail to recognize." Kale bowed lightly. "I seek only to serve, Your Majesty, and to demonstrate the value of fairness, reason, and courage. That alone is the purpose of my presence." The court watched, astonished. The Queen, untouchable and perfect for countless centuries, had acknowledged a human as a teacher in matters of judgment and values. She had knelt in thought before him, as subtly as one might bow to insight, recognizing the depth of his influence without diminishing her own authority. It was unprecedented, a moment that would ripple throughout the empire for generations. In the days that followed, Kale's presence continued to influence decisions, policies, and perspectives. The courtiers, diplomats, and advisors began to emulate his methods, seeking reason over instinct, fairness over dominance, and cooperation over conflict. Trade disputes were resolved more quickly, alliances strengthened, and the empire began to operate with a new efficiency born not from fear or beauty, but from wisdom and integrity. Zyra herself was changed. She continued to command her empire with grace and authority, but now she did so with a perspective she had never before embraced. She sought counsel not just for formality, but with genuine consideration. She listened actively, weighed opinions, and incorporated insight from all corners of the empire. Kale had reminded her that leadership was not about appearance, power, or intimidation. It was about vision, clarity, and respect. One evening, in the quiet of the palace gardens, Zyra and Kale walked together. The bioluminescent flora glowed softly, and the waters of the small streams reflected the stars above. The palace, magnificent and ancient, seemed peaceful in comparison to the storm of ideas and changes that had been set into motion. "You have done more than survive in this empire," Zyra said, her voice quiet but earnest. "You have reshaped it not by force, not by appearance, but by insight. You have reminded me that even a human can influence greatness when guided by integrity and courage." Kale looked at her, calm as ever. "I only acted according to my principles, Your Majesty. The change you see is not mine alone. It is the result of the willingness to listen, to consider, and to act wisely. True progress belongs to those who embrace it." Zyra paused, reflecting on his words. She realized that the empire itself had grown stronger not because of conquest or display, but because of understanding, fairness, and insight. Kale had demonstrated humanity's greatest strength, the ability to see beyond the surface, to act with reason, and to inspire others quietly yet powerfully. In the following weeks, Kale's influence continued to spread. Policies he had advised on improved lives across the empire. Disputes were resolved without bloodshed. Trade and diplomacy flourished. The courtiers no longer whispered mockery. They spoke of respect, admiration, and curiosity. Humans were no longer seen as weak or inferior. They were recognized as capable, resilient, and wise. Zyra, in particular, grew in understanding and humility. She had mocked human beauty initially, expecting arrogance and weakness. Instead, she had encountered clarity, courage, and unwavering integrity. She had knelt in thought before Kale's quiet wisdom, realizing that power was not measured by appearance or force, but by intelligence, compassion, and action. The final transformation came not in a dramatic moment, but in subtle, profound ways. Kale's influence had redefined the Queen's understanding of leadership and the Empire's view of humanity. He had arrived as an outsider, a simple human in a world of dazzling aliens. Yet through calm reasoning, integrity, and courage, he had reshaped perceptions, challenged assumptions, and left an indelible mark on the Zareth Empire. As he prepared to leave the palace for the first time, Kale was met with a rare expression from Zyra, a mixture of respect, gratitude, and acknowledgement of his impact. She did not kneel again, but her gaze held the weight of one who had learned a powerful lesson, that true strength is often unseen, that wisdom transcends species, and that even the most ordinary appearance can carry extraordinary power. The palace corridors seemed quieter that evening, but the change was permanent. The court, the advisors, and the empire itself had been transformed. Humans were no longer underestimated. Kale had proven that integrity, intelligence, and courage could command respect beyond beauty or force. And the Queen, once proud and unyielding, had learned humility and insight from a human who had arrived simply by being himself. In the end, Kale departed not as a conqueror, not as a ruler, but as a catalyst for change. The Zareth Empire was stronger, wiser, and more united because of his presence. The Queen had learned to value mind over appearance, fairness over fear, and action guided by principle over superficial displays. and the human who had once been mocked for his simplicity had shown that the greatest power lies not in what is seen, but in what is understood and applied. The stars above the palace shimmered, and the Empire looked out into the galaxy with renewed confidence, guided by wisdom and the quiet strength of a human who had taught them the ultimate lesson. Greatness is not defined by beauty or force, but by the courage to act rightly, the patience to observe, and the integrity to influence change without seeking glory. Kale's story would be remembered for generations, not for feats of strength, not for dazzling beauty, but for the power of mind, spirit, and quiet action, the true essence of humanity. And for Zyra, the queen who had once mocked human beauty, the lesson was eternal. Respect, understanding, and humility were the marks of true leadership, and one human had taught her to see it in full.